Okay. So, so this is a tenure of 11 years, and it's also known as a decade of development. Why? Because there were a lot of contributions made to the industrial sector of Pakistan, to the agricultural sector of Pakistan, in the foreign policy, right? So, and a lot of the important issues were also resolved. For example, the water crisis between India and Pakistan were resolved through the Indus Water Treaty of 1960. Okay, so let's look at the 4 mark questions first of all from this topic. Who was Ayub Khan? He was the president after Skandar Mirza. He was also an army chief. He was the one who exposed the Rawalpindi conspiracy. Guys, you remember the Rawalpindi conspiracy during the time of Liaquat Ali Khan, when a coup was planned to overthrow Liaquat Ali Khan. That basically that plan was exposed by Ayub Khan. Basically, Ayub Khan was against the conflicts between civil and military governments. So he wanted to have both of these governments on the same lines. So this is why that coup was made unsuccessful because of his efforts. Secondly, again, he is known for all of these reforms in the industries, in the agriculture. This is why, because of his agricultural reforms, this tenure of Ayub Khan was also known as the Green Revolution in Pakistan, because it was the first time ever that the agricultural sector was mechanized. There were machines that were being used in the agricultural sector of Pakistan. Uh, the GDP allocation was greater as compared to the previous years. And then he also signed the Indus Water Treaty to solve the issues, the water crisis with India. Indus Water Treaty was signed in 1960. So what happened was, initially after the independence, you see guys, there are 5 rivers, 5 to 6 rivers in Punjab: Indus, Ravi, Jhelum, Chenab, Satluj. And Pakistan and India had this conflict over who's going to own which of these rivers. So this treaty was signed. As a result, 3 of the rivers were given direct control to Pakistan, and the control of 2 of these, and 2 to 3 of these rivers was also given to India. Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab were given to Pakistan, and Ravi, Satluj, and Beas were given to India. So this is how this issue was resolved in 1960, and it was a very important contribution because Pakistan has an agro economy. Most of our agricultural lands are the Indus Plains, the upper and lower Indus Plains in Punjab and Sindh, and it is very important for that area to get sufficient amount of water throughout the year for the production of agricultural crops. Right. This is why it is considered as a very important contribution. Oh yeah, although yes, the treaty was signed in 1960 and it did resolve the issue, but still till date we face certain problems in terms of the water distribution, because the headworks of these 3 rivers, Ravi, Satluj, and Beas, are with India. And now I mean, obviously Pakistan, because Pakistan has control of these 3 rivers, Indus, Chenab, and Jhelum. We have the headworks. It's up to us when to open, when to close the headworks. Similarly, because India has control over Ravi and Satluj, 2 very important rivers, they have a complete right over over when to open the headworks, when to close the headworks. If you look at the topography of India and Pakistan geographically, India is on a little higher altitude than Pakistan. So when they open the headworks during the monsoon seasons, all of the flood water flows to Pakistan. That is when Pakistan experiences flooding as well. All right. And let's say when the headworks are closed, that is again a difficult time for the country, for Pakistan, because it results in water shortage. So although the issue was resolved, the issue over the authorities of these rivers was resolved, but again, Pakistan is still facing water distribution issues in terms of when to open, when to close the headworks, without a warning maybe, and it causes problems for the country. In terms of the foreign policy of Ayub Khan, there was the Tashkent Agreement signed in 1966. India and Pakistan both were on, they had this war in 1965. So it had to be settled because it had caused a lot of conflicts in the subcontinent region. So USSR, they basically brought Pakistan and India to an agreement. It was known as the Tashkent Agreement later on, and they wanted both the countries to sit together and resolve their problems. So the war was settled down in 1966, but the Kashmir issue wasn't resolved because the reason for the 1965 war was the Kashmir issue. This is why this war took place. So the war was the war was put down. The immediate reasons, the immediate problems were settled, but still the major problem, the Kashmir issue, was not solved. All right. Um, Ayub Khan faced a lot of criticism from the people because they wanted him to resolve the Kashmir issue instead of these immediate causes. This was the reason why both of the countries were fighting. They were really determined to get the control of Kashmir. Till date, you see how Pakistan and India are still fighting over Kashmir. So all of this tells us that how important, how pressing this issue is and needed a resolution immediately. But again, you can consider the Tashkent agreement as a success to an extent, because obviously some of the problems were resolved, but the major issue still remained. All right. Another contribution of Ayub Khan in terms of politics was the Constitution of 1962, a very, very important um, reform. You guys, you remember the first constitution of Pakistan was made in 1956 during the time of Skandar Mirza. And the second constitution was made it was basically made during the time of Ayub Khan in 1962. Again, it followed a presidential form of government. Objectives resolution, the reports of the Basic Principles Committee were the basis of this constitution as well. To some extent, it followed the one unit scheme and a new scheme known as the basic democracy. So what happened was Ayub Khan introduced a set of government under this title, basic democracies. We're going to come to that later, but for now, just know, just as one unit scheme was a basis for the 1956 constitution, the basic democracy served as a basis for the 62's constitution here. President had the most powers. President could reject or pass any laws suggested by the assembly. Pakistan was given this official Islamic Republic of Pakistan name. Both of the east and west wings were allowed to make their own governments. So some sort of provincial autonomy was approved just for the east and west Pakistan. This constitution also proposed a central legislature and a national assembly with equal seats for both the East and West Pakistan. Central legislature and the National Assembly, again, central legislature is form of federation, federal government, where National Assembly is a parliament where the proposition and opposition they meet to discuss these important issues, debate on the pressing problems. And it was important for both of the communities of West and East Pakistan to be represented equally in the legislators and the assembly. That is what the constitution agreed to. Urdu and Bengali both were declared as the national languages of the country. So you see how most of the problems that the 56 constitution had were resolved in the 62's constitution, because the concerns of the East Pakistanis were addressed here. So this was a success of this constitution here. Basic democracies were introduced in 1960. It was a 4-tier setup. So what happened was Ayub Khan divided the entire system of government in 4 sections. The first section was the Union Council, then the district Tehsil Council, the district council, and then the division councils. So the Union Council is basically the major, or you could say the first rank of this 4-tier system, which basically covers the most of the area. For example, if I tell you guys, let's say we are grouping 4 cities together: Rawalpindi, Islamabad, Jhelum, Rawat. So we group these 4 cities together and we make a union council for these cities. Then, and that union council will be looking over the policies of these 4 cities. Tehsil Council is sort of a more specified council of some more specific places. Let's say we divide 2 of the cities to get Islamabad and Rawalpindi together in one council, and the other 2, Rawat and Jhelum, together in one council. So that is what a Tehsil Council is. Then further, the next step of Tehsil Council is the District Council, where the council looks over an individual city. There's going to be a district council individually for Islamabad, there's going to be a district council for Rawalpindi, and so on for the other 2 cities as well. All right. And then there will be division councils. The division councils look after certain areas of a specific city. For example, there will be 1 to 2 to 3 division councils within Islamabad, multiple division councils within Rawalpindi and the other cities. All right. This is how the government system was actually established at this point in time. Four-tier system, four councils looking over their own areas. So most of the major decisions were made by the union councils, and most of the area-specific decisions, regional specific decisions were made by the division councils, because they were directly responsible for all of the undertakings within their regions. Okay. Total of 80,000 representatives were chosen. They were called the basic Democrats, and the number was 40,000 of the people, 40,000 of these Democrats were chosen from the East Pakistan, and 40,000 from West Pakistan. All right. And all of these members were chosen by the Assembly and the President of Pakistan. Guys, is it all clear up till now? Please let me know if there's any question.
Nice, so clear, sir.
All right. Okay. Regional Cooperation Development 1964. This is another contribution in terms of the foreign policy. This RCD, Regional Cooperation Development, was signed between Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey. The purpose of this agreement was to promote economical development, social development of these three countries. It was established in 1964, but this RCD was dissolved in 1979. And it was replaced with this new organization known as the ECO, Economic Cooperation Organization. And it was, this ECO was also established by Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey, but later on, Afghanistan also became a part of ECO, and 6 other Central Asian countries. Okay, so the purpose of RCD and ECO was to oversee the economic development, to make plans for the developmental projects, to look after the social, economic, culture of the countries. Yeah. All right. The Green Revolution of 1960s is the agricultural contributions of Ayub Khan. So Pakistan was facing this water shortage during this tenure. And the first step that Ayub Khan did was to sign this Indus Water Treaty with India to resolve the water crisis. Pakistan built these important dams, the Mangla Dam, the Tarbela Dam, on these rivers just so they could store the water. And these two dams are one of the largest dams. Mangla Dam is one of the largest dams of the world, even Tarbela Dam as well. So both of these dams are used for the storage of water today till date, and they produce hydroelectric power as well. And they supply water to most of the cities surrounding the Mangla and the Tarbela regions. So another contribution that Ayub Khan made was the land laws. He specified certain you could say certain size of lands that the people were allowed to possess. We're gonna get to these details later on, but now just know that the land laws were introduced. The purpose of these land laws was just to increase the output, because it was unfair if wealthy landlords had owned most of the areas of land and other farmers just got small parts. So it was just to remove the disparity between the land, you could say the parts of land that people owned. These land laws were introduced. Secondly, HYVs, heavy yielding varieties of seeds. HYVs are the types of seeds that produce greater yields of plants as compared to the normal seeds. Second, and then another reform was to mechanize the industrial sector. Ayub Khan had, because of the industrial reforms, Pakistan was producing most of the raw material within the country. Most of the machines were being produced here, and some were also imported. So those machines, such as tractors for the plowing and harvesting, these machines were used in the agricultural sector, and obviously all of it contributed to the greater outputs. All right. Secondly, decade of development. We sum up all of these contributions in terms of the industrial contributions and the agricultural contributions under one category as the decade of development. For most of the reforms, number one, agriculture, you see how there were attempts to increase the output of the agriculture sector to make it more self-sufficient. There were attempts to increase the production of the industries by providing enough education to the workers, by improving the health standards of the working conditions of the industries, by providing higher wages to the workers. All right. So Pakistan was actually progressing at this point in history. This is why we see the industries are booming. The agricultural sector was booming. Pakistan was exporting most of the products made in the industries. We had even established some of the very important mills in our country. So that is why all of this era was known as the decade of development. Ayub Khan had to impose martial law in 1958 when he came into the power. Why? Because we see certain problems during the tenure of Iskandar Mirza. Ayub Khan, he was the president initially, but he also looked after the government system under the martial law. He took full control of the government, and the reasons here are that number one, he considered Skandar Mirza as an incapable leader. And because obviously during the time of Skandar Mirza, the there were a lot of crises in terms of politics, the food crisis, political issues. We already know the instability that was caused due to the change of prime ministers. Skandar Mirza had changed 4 prime ministers within 3 years, which was a very um, I mean, it added to a it added very negatively to the politics of Pakistan. There were laws being changed every year. There were new laws being made, and the country was just moving away from the stability. So Ayub Khan thought it was important to impose martial law, to have a government under a military government, to just make laws. And obviously, the only difference between democracy and the martial law is that martial law is a full-fledged government of military, and democracy is a rule of the civil governments where people have more power, people have more say, and they can choose their own governments. Martial law, in martial law, there's no right to the people. Obviously, it's just the army running the country. So Ayub Khan thought that it was important for the country to have to basically have this martial law setup of government, just to control the populism that was growing, to control the political instability that was growing, and to remain self-sufficient and efficient. So guys, another reason for martial law, for the martial law, was to oversee the economic growth. The industries, the agriculture, trade, and mining, most of these sectors were in decline during the time of Skandar Mirza. And Ayub Khan wanted to make some very strong policies regarding these sectors. And it was important to have a very strong and stable government for the policies to be made. This is why martial law was thought as an important step moving forward. The poor law and order situation in the country. So what happened was, there was in 1958, the East Pakistani Assembly, the East Pakistani Assembly Speaker was killed. There was there were a lot of conflicts in the East Pakistan at that time. So it was important to eliminate this structure of government that was being run in the East Pakistan, to have the political stability back, to get the country on these stable lines. It was important for the government to be very strong, and that would have been only possible under a, a martial law tenure. So guys, don't forget to add your analysis with each point. The 1962 constitution was not successful because right after 11 years, it was removed, and there was this new constitution of 1973 that was introduced, and we follow the 73 constitution till date in Pakistan. The 62 constitution was only there for 11 years, and there are certain reasons for that. Number one, East Pakistanis, they did get these equal number of seats, but they still protested and criticized because they wanted more seats than the West Pakistan. They have been protesting against the disparity of seats, but what they were trying to say was that because East Pakistan has a greater population than the West Pakistan, the number of seats of East Pakistan must also be greater. All right. But when they got the equal seats, although it was also a step made by Ayub Khan to somehow satisfy the East Pakistanis, but they still wanted more rights here, and they felt oppressed. This is why this constitution was opposed. The objective resolution, which suggested Islamic Republic of Pakistan, it was criticized by the religious groups of the country. Okay, because they said that the constitution, it goes against the spirit of Islam, but the name Islamic Republic of Pakistan, it should be I mean, they just wanted the government system to exactly follow the Sharia law. All right. Another reason was that people did not like the power, the power with the president. President was declared as the head of state, and president was allowed to reject or pass laws with the consultation of assembly. So people wanted the assembly or the prime ministers to have more power, not the president. President also had the emergency powers. We've seen how the emergency powers were misused during the time of Ghulam Muhammad. And that was obviously that was the point where there's this political instability in the country had begun. So people knew that this emergency powers rule could cause a lot of problems in the future, and you'll see how these imbalances will be created in the upcoming chapters. You'll see how the conflicts were created because of the emergency powers. So all of these reasons caused the 1962 constitution to be unsuccessful here. Why did Ayub Khan become unpopular during his last years in Pakistan? Guys, we've seen most of the contributions of Ayub Khan up till now. We've seen how the developmental projects were being introduced. We can also think of these contributions in both the aspects, the positive and the negative. If you guys think about it, you see most of the reforms at times get introduced with very, very good intentions of deliverance, but they backfire at times. People misuse the laws. The laws are not properly implemented at times. So, because, for example, the 1962 Constitution, it was a very good step. They tried to resolve most of the problems, but again, it was still criticized. The basic democracies, the 4-tier system, the presidential power, the agricultural reforms, the industrial reforms. So all of these points have their positive and the negative aspects. I want you to think of why do you think Ayub Khan became unpopular during his last few years as the president and the chief of armies. So guys, why do you think, what could have caused the unpopularity of Ayub Khan?
Sir, the people thought that Ayub Khan was imposing his own ideas and laws on the people without consulting with anyone.
And how would you give an example here? I mean, which law are you talking about?
Sir, like the Constitution of 1962.
Okay, all right, right. Okay, that is a fair point. But when you talk about the Constitution of 62, don't just generally mention Constitution, because obviously Pakistanis wanted Constitution at that time, but they didn't want president to have all the power. Okay, so you can write how the presidential form of government was criticized. All right. Anything else, guys? Anything else? Why do you think Ayub Khan became unpopular?
Because he like held absolute power and the people had no say.
Okay, I mean that's fine. Okay, let's look at the reasons now. Number one, the ceasefire between India and Pakistan after 1965. Kashmir issue was not resolved. People wanted a definite solution to that problem. And this is why Ayub Khan became unpopular, because he could not get a solution to the Kashmir issue. Number two, this ruling style, the presidential power, the dictatorship over here, it was criticized. All right, because he had the supreme authority. Nobody likes, I mean, most of the people, the civilian governments, they don't really prefer uh, dictatorship or the martial law style of government, because it takes away this basic right of speech, right of expression from the people. All right. So people were not happy with this presidential power here. They were not happy with the martial law, actually. Okay. Inflation was in rise. The prices of basic commodities had gone high because the industrial developments were not looked after uh, carefully. Most of the wealth was possessed by some of the important families of Pakistan. The reason being that because the economy, the industries are growing, Privatization was a major factor. Most of the private sectors, private industries were also growing. That is why only a few business-oriented families had control of most of Pakistan's wealth. This is why it was considered as a failure, because most of the population of Pakistan was living below the line of poverty. And yeah, this is why he had to resign. All right. So, okay, moving on. Another important contribution was the change of capital from Karachi to Islamabad. Guys, Karachi was basically um, it was the capital of Pakistan initially, but then it was Islamabad was chosen as the new capital. Okay, I think we have a question. Yes, this is also an important point, that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had formed his political party, and they were trying to undermine the power of Ayub Khan. They were campaigning against him. You see, whenever the instability grows within a country, whenever it's foreseen that the president or the head of state loses the power, that is when all of the opponents, especially people from the opposition or the independent candidates, they try to get that opportunity to maximize the criticism, to maximize the pressure. You see how Ayub Khan removed Iskandar Mirza because of these the same reasons, that Pakistan was not really governed properly. There was a change of prime ministers in 3 years. I mean, I'm not talking about how genuine these reasons are, but just the fact that people try to take advantage when when a certain political party or a politician or a leader gets weakened. So at this point in time, when Ayub Khan was facing this criticism from all the sides, from the politicians on the constitution, the people were not happy, the East Pakistanis were still not satisfied, the Kashmir issue was still there, the inflation was on rise, most of the agriculture industry reforms were backfiring. That is when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto took this advantage, and he formed his own political party to basically campaign against Ayub Khan, and he was successful in gaining a huge majority of people who were actually against the tenure of Ayub Khan. देखो, ये तो सिंपल है कि अगर इस तरह से कुछ होता है कि आपके लीडर इन योर कंट्री, let's say, fails to deliver, क्या होगा? Opposition क्या करेगी? You guys already know the situation of the country. आज भी यही होता है, yeah. Everybody tries to take advantage of of these situations, all right. And when the people, and I mean, when the general public is not happy, they'll obviously join the opposition. So यहाँ पे this campaign of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was a severe blow to the tenure of Ayub Khan, क्योंकि a political leader, an influential leader, was campaigning against him. All right. So guys, Islamabad was chosen as the new capital of Pakistan. Back to the topic. Number one, Karachi, also, although it is a very important trade hub of Pakistan, but because of the commercial activities, it was not possible to have the entire sector of government within that city, because obviously you need an infrastructure for the for the all of these proceedings. You need proper buildings, offices, assemblies, and Karachi being a very packed city with already a very greater population, it was seen as a good choice to move the capital to a peaceful city such as Islamabad, a clean city, because obviously it was more spacious. It had all of these forests, and Islamabad wasn't a very developed city at that time. It was developed because of the capital. All right. Then army headquarters were located in Rawalpindi. It was important to have the army headquarters and the civil government headquarters closer together. So because Ayub Khan was the army chief at that time, he was also the president, he wanted to have all of these districts together, all right, just to have this efficient administration. And then there was another reason, climatic conditions. Obviously, I think you can maybe, instead of this last point here, you can add this another point that I want you guys to write. It's about the safety. Karachi was, I mean, it was safe to have Islamabad as a capital city because it's surrounded by mountains on two sides and the other two sides are open. So it is easily, I mean, it's defended. So most of the hilly areas, the Magala Hills, they cover this entire layer of the country. All right. So it was safe to choose Islamabad as the new capital as compared to Karachi. Now Pakistan, okay, there were these two wars that took place between this tenure, the 1965 war and the 1971 wars. Guys, we're going to come back to this question later because we're talking about just the tenure of Ayub Khan, and this tenure ended in 1969. So I don't want to talk about the 1971 war right now. We can discuss the 65 war, but I think we're gonna do that in the next lecture. We're gonna just discuss the 14-mark question right now. We will have a detailed discussion over these wars once the ministries are over. Just know that the 65 war took place during the time of Ayub Khan. You guys need to analyze that war in terms of its successes and failures and how it contributed to the popularity and unpopularity of Ayub Khan. TK, and also when you write about the Tashkent Agreement, it's important to write about these wars over there as well. So the point is that for now, just know the reasons and their analysis. We're going to discuss these wars in detail later on. So agricultural reforms of Ayub Khan were the most important of his domestic policies. Do you agree? Give reasons for your answer. So now there's this point of agricultural reforms mentioned on level 3. You need to talk about 7 reasons and then evaluate as which reason was the most important. So you can talk about the Indus Water Treaty, you can talk about the agricultural reforms, you can talk about the social reforms, the industrial reforms, you can talk about the constitutional reforms, the foreign policy. No, you cannot talk about the foreign policy because the question says the domestic reforms, domestic policies. Okay, yeah. So be very mindful of these words, guys. When if a question states that you're talking about the domestic policies only, do not write about the foreign policies. You cannot write about the Tashkent Agreement. You cannot write about the RCD or the ECO. All right, you'll just be talking about the domestic policies. You can talk about the Islamabad being chosen as the capital, social, political, educational, industrial, agricultural reforms. Okay, all of these paragraphs have all the details. For example, I was talking about the land laws, 12.5 acres, 1,000 acres. All of the details, the specifics are given in the notes. The pattern is again that you need to write 7 points with one evaluation at the end, and then you need to write which point do you think was the most important contribution of Ayub Khan. And remember, if you think a certain reason as the most important, you can make up to 2 to 3 points for that as well. For example, if you think the agricultural reforms were the most important, then you can make 2 paragraphs for agricultural reforms and write 2 different reasons. All right, that's completely up to you. If you're good with making just 1 point for agriculture and 6 other points, go with that. If you can make 2 points for agriculture and 5 other points, go for that. All right, but don't cross the limit of 3 points for one reason. And keep your points distinct. You need to write 1 point in 1 paragraph, and please write your answers in paragraphs. Paragraphing is very, very important. Please let me know if there's any question, everybody. Any questions from the lecture?